And my name is Kate Warren, and I'm the Director of Global Recruiting Services here at Devex. So in my position here, I work with our what we call executive members, which are the hiring organizations within development, the NGOs, the donor firms, the consulting firms that are doing the hiring. So what I'm going to focus on today is more towards mid-career professionals that are looking to kind of land their next job within development, or for professionals that are working maybe in a different industry, but they're looking to enter the development space. So let's get started. And again, as Lauren said, if you have questions, you can send them to her throughout the presentation, and then at the end, we'll take some of those select questions to go over. So first, we're going to cover the employment landscape. So talking about hiring trends, I often am asked by individuals, where are the jobs? What sectors, what regions, what countries, and how do I find out kind of what the next big thing is? So I should know, where to plan my career just based on the need. Typically, the short answer to that is follow the money. So, the money comes from donor agencies, governments, foundations, and they're the ones who ultimately fund these projects, and the projects are the ones that are ultimately hiring positions. So where the money goes tends to be where the jobs are. So, what are the hot sectors and regions, and for example, that USAID is putting dollars in, or DFID, or the EU. That's kind of where you want to look to see what the trends are as far as the kind of careers and regions that are hot. Right now, it tends to be a lot of post-conflict countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sudan. There's a lot of money flowing into those, and so there's a lot of positions both in country and also at the headquarters of organizations that are implementing projects there. This doesn't mean you necessarily have to locate to one of these countries, but being familiar or having experience in one of them can be a very marketable skill. Sectors that are pretty hot right now would be global health, infrastructure, engineering, economic development, and climate change. And climate change is kind of a new one. Traditionally, particularly on the U.S. government side, there's been not as much funding, little to no funding in climate change. So this is an area where it's very primed for growth, and there aren't a lot of established professionals within development that have experience in climate change. So it's a particularly good sector to try to leverage a career in, just because, frankly, there's less competition than some of the others. The types of jobs that are available within development are plentiful. Typically, people think of a technical expert when they're thinking of working in development. So someone who has a real technical expertise that typically goes and works in the field, works in the developing country, maybe a public health official or an engineer, or a monitoring and evaluation specialist. But there's also program management experts. So maybe they don't have a specific technical expertise, but have experience managing overall development programs. You can be a technical expert and a program manager, but sometimes people fall into one or the other category. There's research, so maybe not actually implementing a project on the field, but doing research around policy or how to design the programs, the impact that they're having. Fundraising. So again, the way that organizations are able to do their work is by getting funding from other entities. And so fundraising can be for an NGO or a nonprofit, which would be getting grants, or it could be a company that's trying to get contracts. And so fundraising kind of mean two things depending on what kind of organization that you're working with. Business development is typically what the for-profit side would call it, but a lot of those skills are interchangeable. Human resources, recruiting. Recruitment is a very big part of development work. And the reason being is that since so much of the work is project-based, there's a lot of hiring, and people are moving from a consultant position to another consultant position. And the nature of the hiring process within development is a little unique in that often the hiring stage begins at the proposal stage. So when an organization would like to bid on a proposal to secure funding for a program, they often have to recruit before they even know if they're going to have the funding. And often there will be 5, 10 organizations that are doing recruiting for the same project, and ultimately only one of them will win and be able to implement it. So there's a lot of recruitment and human resources issues around that. Logistics and operations, so going in and setting up these field offices, setting up the IT and the infrastructure, setting up security measures, and depending on the location. So they're not necessarily working on the technical aspects of a program, but they're working on the operational side. And then communications and advocacy, and this is kind of a growing field within development as more organizations are putting emphasis on a broad communications plan. So it could be going out and developing the website for an organization and coming up with a social media strategy to try to raise more funds or awareness around their programs, creating videos highlighting the work they're doing in the field, reaching out to press to get publications in about the work that they're doing. And then there's finance, budget, and contracting officer on the administrative side. So a lot of the development projects are very complex as far as some of them can be $300–500 million programs, or even small ones do need financial oversight and budget planning, and typically there are very strict donor requirements and the need for professionals who are familiar with those. There are also several types of employers. The consulting firms and implementing NGOs, and we kind of group those into one because they essentially work in the same way, and that they are going and bidding on projects, be it a grant or a contract, and then going into the country and actually implementing the project on behalf of the donor. Then there are the donor agencies or international finance institutions. So these are like USAID, World Bank, African Development Bank. And so they aren't necessarily on the ground doing as much of the hands-on implementation. They're more doing kind of the broader level work as far as putting out the grants and contracts, managing the grants and contracts, deciding priorities of where the funding will go and the kind of programs that will happen. And there's advocacy NGOs. So think of Save Darfur. They're not necessarily implementing projects on the ground, but they're trying to raise awareness around a certain issue. Private foundations like the Gates Foundation, so these have become big players within a development space, and they work almost like a donor agency in essence, but also can do implementing work themselves. Then there's the corporate social responsibility side. So more and more companies are going a step beyond just creating a foundation and doing philanthropy work and actually tying it to their core business goals, and are doing essentially development work and working side by side donors and NGOs to maybe increase the health services within a community of where they have a presence, so that it can raise the health of their maybe potential clients or employees. Then there's suppliers. So these might be logistics firms, security firms, so that are supplying goods and services to any of these organizations. And think tanks and institutes. So they're doing more the broad level policy, research, analysis, and not so much the actual implementing on the ground. Quickly show some of those employers. These are all groups that advertise on Devex. So, but these are ones that are doing a lot of hiring right now. Typically most of the positions tend to be more with the implementing NGOs and consulting firms than the actual donor agencies themselves, but a lot of the donor agencies are having big hiring pushes right now. So it's actually a really good opportunity to try to get a job with, for example, USAID or DFID or Asian Development Bank. They're all doing a lot of hiring this year and the coming years. So I'm going to talk about kind of transitioning to your next job, whether it be transitioning from a field outside of development to development or transitioning to kind of your next step within the development industry. For people that are looking to enter in development, there are a lot of transferable professions. I'm going to list some of them here. Engineering is definitely one. Banking, finance, healthcare, education, communications, human resources, accounting, management, training, ICT. You see them all here: business development, proposal writing, law, So these are all kinds of professions that your skills and expertise could be used within a development context. Now, it becomes a challenge to break into the field, but if you have experience with one of these, this isn't an exhaustive list, but some of the top ones, then using a few steps that we'll go over, you can have a good chance of being able to leverage your experience in one of these areas into a development job. So making the transition, often it takes multiple steps. So you're not going to be, for example, I'll have down here like a corporate attorney and then the next day get a job working on a USAID rule of law program. It's very hard to make that immediate leap. Often it takes a few different job changes before you can get really where exactly it is that you want to be. So rather than focusing on getting that dream job right away and submitting your resume turned down, focus on jobs within development that take advantage of your skills and your transferable skills that you can leverage. So for example, in the use of a corporate attorney, most organizations often of a decent size will have in-house counsel. So maybe try to get a job being an in-house attorney for an NGO that works on the kinds of issues that you're really interested in. And then you can, once you're in there, start to get more involved and learn more about the work they're doing, make those networks and connections to then be able to try to leverage into a position where you're using your legal expertise but maybe working on the actual rule of law programs that organization might be doing. So it's really about looking at your skills that are transferable into the development industry, figuring out what jobs you have the best chance of getting with those skills, and first going after that job. And then on that job, work on skills that you maybe didn't have in your previous job that you can leverage to then get your next one. And then maybe even it'll take another one to be able to get to the actual kind of position you want. So I have some examples here as well. Maybe you have experience doing business development with a government contractor, but your heart is really, you want to do SME programs in Africa. That's your dream job. But you're like, how do I get from there to here? Well, you can use those business development skills to leverage a position with a USAID contractor. And those are skills that are very sought after if you are good at proposal writing and business intelligence. So focus on a business development job. And once you land that, hopefully with an organization that does work in SME and does work in Africa, then you're working on USAID proposals where you're learning about the issues, you're getting involved in kind of designing the programs, working side by side with the technical experts that are doing this work, learning from them, building a relationship with them, networking with them, getting well known within your organization as someone who is very informed about these issues. Then maybe when they win one of the projects that you worked on the proposal, you can transition into a position maybe starting up the project, using your experience from developing the proposal to start up the project, and then using that experience of starting up the project to actually work on the project. So, there are definitely ways that you can position yourself through a few strategic moves. For people that are already working in development and maybe you're not in the position that you ultimately want to be in, you have another example down here, program coordinator working in an NGO that does global health, but you're really interested in doing education programs, and that's where your heart ultimately lies. Focus on the skills that you can build that are transferable as far as, maybe working on with a specific donor. A lot of programs these days aren't necessarily just focused on one sector. A health program could have a large education component. Try to advocate for being able to get involved on that side of it so that you can leverage your skills into basically the same kind of program but with an education background. So if you maybe have experience managing budgets of a USAID-funded project, then look for jobs that are in education but would require those skills to be able to leverage yourself into education field. Some of the transferable skills to focus on in your jobs now that are pretty much sought after across the board within development jobs would be technical writing. So a lot of writing is involved as far as reporting to the donors about projects. So being a strong writer is very sought after. Proposal writing, it's pretty hard for anyone to escape getting involved in proposals within an organization. Oftentimes, proposals will come in groups, and staff is stretched, and pretty much it's all hands on deck. And so if you are a strong proposal writer, you can really make yourself stand out, and also is a very marketable skill for future employers. Budget creation. Pretty much every project requires a budget, so having experience creating a budget and then managing that budget is very sought after. The larger the budget project you can work on, the better. So if you have a choice between working on 2 different projects and one has a much larger budget than the other, thinking about your next step, being able to say that you managed the budget of a $50 million program versus $1 million program will be pretty strong in for your next move. Doing research and being able to quickly get up to speed on a new issue or topic is a frequent need within the field. So being a good researcher and being able to quickly become an expert in something. Contract administration, so familiarity with working with a particular donor, knowing their rules and regulations. That's a learning curve that most organizations don't want to have to teach someone from scratch. So if you have experience working with a particular donor, maybe it's not in the exact field you want, but you can really leverage those skills to get a job in the exact field that you want. Monitoring and evaluation, that can be a technical expertise, but pretty much any project does require at least some monitoring and evaluation from the people who are working on it. So having any of that experience is very marketable. And then just general project management. And the same as the budget management, the larger the project, the more people you have experience managing, then the better it'll position you for future jobs. So these are kind of the things to focus on that can be very transferable across the board. Often a question I get is, should I go back to school? I'm not getting the kinds of jobs I want. Should I get another degree? Well, the short answer is you definitely need a graduate degree to really take off in a career and development. Now, I don't advocate for having a graduate degree straight out of school. I think you should definitely have a few years' work experience before going back and getting a degree. Not only will it help you decide if that's actually what you want to do, but it'll make it much easier to find a job when you finish that graduate program. What happens if you go straight through undergrad, through a graduate program, and enter the workforce, you are competing against people who have just had an undergraduate degree. And you might think, well, hey, I have a master's, then I should be able to compete very easily with someone with just a bachelor's. But as it turns out, a lot of organizations would rather hire someone with just a bachelor's degree for those very entry-level positions because they can pay them less. And often the expectations of the kind of work they're doing is more realistically aligned with what the work is. So often organizations find that they hire someone who has a graduate degree for an entry-level position. They might get very disgruntled with the very administrative nature of the work. So being able to have a few years experience in addition to your degree will help push you up to the next notch of being able to get maybe a mid-level position, not straight out, entry-level type of position, which you'll be probably have more fun in, and it'll make yourself a little more marketable. So without a master's degree, you will quickly plateau and not be able to advance within the field. So ideally, you maybe are undergraduate and you come out and you work for a few years, and then you can go back to school. If it's possible, try getting a degree while you're working to not take yourself out of the workforce, because it does become really challenging to re-enter again. And that way you're keeping your skills up, you're keeping your networks fresh, and you have real current job history. So if you're able to do a program that allows you to do it part-time or while working at least part-time, then that is very much encouraged. When deciding between a more general degree or a technical degree, usually it's better to go for the more specific degree. And the reason is getting this graduate degree is more kind of like checking a box. So there are very few positions where they would say you have to have a master's in international development, for example. They would basically, do you have a master's degree? Yes or no is often the question. So no matter what the degree is, you'll check that box. But there are some positions where you will definitely need to have that technical degree. So the technical degree kind of covers your bases. It'll make you marketable for that specific area, and it'll also check the box for any kind of more general type of career. So, again, it's not necessarily doable for everyone, but when you're trying to decide between two different degree programs and what would be the more marketable, going for the more technical specific degree usually is. There are some positions where getting a PhD can make sense, tend to be the ones that fall more under the social sciences, so like economists doing monitoring and evaluation work. Often a PhD can be very marketable. But for most positions, it's really not necessary. So unless it's something that you really want to do, personally, it probably won't advance you too much professionally, with the exception of those few areas like being an economist or M&E. But get to know your field and talk to people that are in positions that you want to be in, and find out what their educational level is before really going and making the commitment to getting a job. And once you have only one graduate degree, oftentimes I hear people say, maybe if they want to transition into a different area, they are thinking about going back to school and getting another degree. Really, the more effective way is just getting the experience, if you can. Experience, once you have that, check that box, once you have that master's degree, experience will trump any additional degrees. So going and getting a second master's, for example, usually will not help you as much as using that time and effort to gaining real skills and experience. There are some exceptions where it's a medical degree, like an MD. If you want to be a doctor, you have to get an MD. Or if you want to do legal work, you usually often have to have a JD. But if you're trying to decide I have a master's, but I'm interested in doing SME work, so should I go back and get my MBA? Typically, the time and money that you would spend on an MBA would be better put to use trying to get real skills and experience. But it can depend. So now talk about finding and actually getting the job. So do your homework. It's really important, particularly once you're already established in your career. You don't really need to do kind of shoot your resume off to everyone. You really want to kind of focus your search to make sure that you are making a strategic move. So if you're already employed, your next position you want to make sure is really taking in the direction that you want to go. So research the key employers and players in the field, know what kind of projects they do, what kind of positions they have and hire, so you can really focus that search. Attend seminars, conferences, other events for the industry. So if it is something that's new, maybe you're working in health right now and you're interested in education as a previous example, start going to different conferences and seminars that talk about those issues. Reasons twofold. You're able to get information to make yourself more knowledgeable about the field, and you're also able to make a lot of contacts and build your network that you could use, leverage to try to find a job within that space. Try doing informational interviews with organizations. So, oftentimes it's like the stars have to align for that perfect job and perfect employer to be open when you're looking. It doesn't hurt to try an informational interview. Maybe they don't have, there's an organization you're very interested in, they don't have an open position. See if they'll do an informational interview so that you can get to know them, they can get to know you, and then maybe when a position does open, you'll be someone that they think of right away. If you're someone who's transitioning into development and you don't have a lot of experience on your resume, and maybe you're also not quite sure if this is the field you want to work in, you can try volunteering with an organization. So it lets you kind of learn more about it, test the waters a bit. Also has something to add to your resume, helps you build your networks. Using social networking platforms. Of course, Devex, as individual professional members, you have access to social networking tools on our site. We have over 260,000 professionals that are registered. So you can search for people that work with the employers or in the regions or sectors that you're interested in and connect with them and see if they can help provide advice or guidance or referrals. You can, if you're, again, this is more targeted to people that are transitioning from other industries, but if you are working, for example, an accounting firm or a large management consulting firm, you could volunteer for different overseas assignments in your current position to try to build up your international experience. And that's often very hard to break into, particularly if you want to work in the field. If a position without previous overseas experience. So that can kind of help you get over that chicken and the egg of, well, how do I get the field experience if no one will hire me without the field experience? And then, attend relevant training or certification courses to help build your skills within a certain area and make you more marketable for the next step. And then, of course, it's also a great networking opportunity. And then get familiar with the donor funding cycles and proposal process if you're looking to work with a different donor than we currently do. So make sure that you become very familiar with that so that when you're interviewing with the organization, you're able to talk very openly and freely about how that works. So say, learn the language. So again, if you're transitioning into development or transitioning to kind of a different sector, you want to learn the language of that field. Use the example here of corporate world might say, use terms like sales and clients and revenues, whereas nonprofits might use program development and stakeholders and funding. And so it's a very different vernacular. So just getting familiar with that, because if you start throwing around terms like sales and revenue, then it could really turn off a potential employer that might be with an NGO. Your resume and find the terms that the development industry uses to explain kind of the same concepts. Be sure to focus on keywords. So as many of you might have a profile on Devex or a CV uploaded on Devex, which if you don't, I highly encourage you to. But we have over 350 employers that use that database as a resource when they're looking to hire individuals. And the way they do that is very much looking for people based on keywords. So you want to make sure that your profile and your resume, first of all, is robust enough to be able to have those keywords, but then also uses the right strategic keywords. And the way to think about is, okay, if you were a recruiter or a hiring manager and trying to find someone like you, what words would you use to try to find that person? And make sure those terms are peppered throughout. If there's alternate terms within your industry, example, there might be monitoring evaluation and M&E are two different ways to say the same thing. Make sure you use both types of terms in your resume, because somebody might search M&E, some might search monitoring and evaluation. You want to make sure you show up depending on the search. So making sure you're focusing on those. Just becoming comfortable with the acronyms and inside vernacular, making sure you're using that in your resume. So if you have experience working with a USAID project and you're looking to work with a USAID contractor, put that in there. Put USAID in there. If you're familiar with certain rules and regulations around a donor that have a name, use that. If you're familiar with a certain type of software, use those very specific terms that really speak to the recruiter and show that you really understand the work. So talk about why learning language, make it easier for recruiters to pick you out of the crowd. In addition to Devex and people using keywords to find candidates on Devex.com, but also when you apply to organizations that use a applicant tracking system, as they call it, often those systems will sift through the resumes and rank them based on the amount of keywords that show up in your resume that match to the job description. So it's important to know how technology can hurt you or help you in that sense. So leveraging those keywords so that you can make sure that you are showing up at the top of the list when you apply to jobs. Again, demonstrates understanding of the industry, makes you look like an insider. The best way to find these words are in the job description. Oftentimes people are hesitant to regurgitate the same language that's in a job description that makes them feel like they're not being very sincere. But I encourage you to use those same terms. That's what will stick out to the recruiter and makes it much easier for them to identify and recognize you as a good fit. And again, it's also the same terms that different technology and software use to rank you as a good candidate or not. And it tends to be the words that people use when they're searching Devex.com or other resources to find candidates. Also getting familiar with the company and donor websites and kind of the terms that they use and in the industry journals and news publications. So again, talking about focusing your search. When you're entry level, out of college, looking for a job, applying to everything to see what you get, is a good strategy. But once you're looking to get your next job and you're trying to be strategic about your next step, focusing it will really help you make sure that you are getting the job that will most align with what your ultimate career goals are. It also allows you to take your time to tailor your resume, your CV for each opportunity. So I highly encourage you to, rather than having just one for a job application, that each time you're applying to a job, you tailor that resume. Everybody has pages and pages and pages of experience that they could ultimately put into a resume, and what you're including are highlights. So you want to make sure those highlights are the most relatable to that particular job. So job A might have you require experience that job B does not, and you want to make sure that your resume speaks to the requirements of job A. Learn the different donor formats. So if you are applying to an EU job or an EU contractor, make sure you're submitting your resume in that format. You can find resources on Devex that you have access as an IPM on what those formats are, and we even also offer formatting services for, at least right now, USAID formats to help you get your resume in shape. And take advantage of referral programs. So a lot of organizations do have employee referral programs where the employee who refers you gets a monetary bonus or incentive if you get hired. So it's a win-win for whoever refers you and yourself for getting the job. So definitely don't be shy about asking people to refer you, because oftentimes it's in their interest as well. Only apply to jobs for which you are truly qualified. And I use what I like to call the 80% rule. So any job description that's out there and the requirements are usually just a wish list, and not necessarily the organization's going to be able to find someone who checks all those boxes. But you still want to check most of them. So maybe there's a few things you don't have, but as long as about 80% of the requirements you meet, then go ahead and apply for the job. If you really don't meet any of the requirements, your chances are going to be pretty slim, and so it's kind of a waste of your effort. And it can also hurt you in the end of, for example, you're applying to a job within an organization and the job's just really not right for you. If you constantly are applying to jobs that you're not qualified, if and when you do have that job that you are qualified for and apply, then the recruiter will already remember your name, they will have seen all these applications that you've applied for, and they won't take you as a serious candidate. They'll think you don't really know what you're doing, or see it as kind of a naive approach, and it can really damage your reputation within that organization if you apply too many times to too many different positions that you're not qualified for. So really make sure that you're submitting applications to positions that you really do meet. Always take time to proofread. You'd be surprised how many mistakes we see in resumes and cover letters, from addressing it to the wrong organization to misspelling very common terms. So just always like to throw that plug in there. And take time to localize your resume. So if you're applying to, maybe you're an American and you're applying to a position in Germany, there's different standards there. Oftentimes it's standard practice to include a picture and details like your date of birth on the resume, which would not be standard in the U.S. Vice versa, if you are from a country where putting in your marital status is standard, as well as a picture, if you're applying to a job in the U.S., that's not the standard. So just learning kind of what the local rules are of where you're applying to a job and localizing your resume to make sure you're fitting within that norm. So and then, of course, the old adage, networking, number one. Number one tactic for finding a job. So development is no different than the other industry. I would even argue it could be more so crucial just because it is a very competitive industry. And it's once you get in, it's pretty small world. So it's not too hard to build a strong network and be able to quickly meet a lot of people within the field. With again, the ease of applying online, particularly a current state of the economy, there are sometimes hundreds of applicants for a position, depending on the position. And so it's very overwhelming for hiring managers and recruiters to go through all of those applications. You want to make sure that you stand out, and one of the best ways is through networking and you know, getting yourself through the door in alternate channels besides just applying to the job. You still oftentimes have to apply to the job formally, but using informal efforts such as referrals is very effective. It's particularly important when you're transitioning careers from another field because you know, your resume alone might not get you the interview or get you in the door. You're really going to need someone to advocate for you. And so you're really, really going to have to focus a lot of energy on networking in that case. But networking is a lot easier now these days, particularly with technology. So as we mentioned before, on Devex, you can build your own network. You can network with people all over the world very quickly and easily. So you don't necessarily have to, you know, attend every event within your city, or if you're located in a part of the world where there just really isn't a large development community, then you still have a lot of online tools that you can use to build these networks. So just kind of final closing comments here. Takeaways is, you know, focus on your transferable skills. So those are the skills you need to build and focus on when you're applying to a job. Focus on highlighting those in your resume. You know, don't focus so much on the skills that aren't relatable to the job you're applying to. Really focus on those that are transferable. Do your homework to focus your search. You know, hone in on the exact kind of employers and the type of job you want to make sure that you are really positioning yourself to follow the career path that you envision. Learning the language and speaking the language of the industry is key. And then, of course, networking. And then being patient and persistent. As I said, sometimes it feels like the stars have to align for that right job to show up at the right time. You know, so a lot of times this doesn't happen overnight. And a lot of times you don't, you know, get that perfect job within your first or second or even third job. So it takes just being strategic about your moves and being patient and knowing that you're building a lot of skills and experience along the way that'll ultimately get you where you want to be. And then, of course, you know, visit Devex.com, the job board. Make sure you have a profile and an updated resume in our database. I used to use this database all the time as a recruiter with 2 organizations that are members of Devex, and I meet with these recruiters all the time. We know they use it very, very frequently. So the more updated your information is, the more apt they are to contact you, and more likely you are to show up in search results. You want to make sure you keep, you know, your most recent positions updated on there. You don't want it to be outdated because then you might not. You might be passed over for a position that you actually are qualified for. So be sure to take advantage of all of the tools that are available to you on Devex.com. So I think now we're going to just do a Q&A. And so I think Lauren is going to take a few questions that people have submitted, and we'll answer a few of those.
All right. So thanks, Kate. That was a great presentation. What I'm going to do, instead of asking specific questions that one person might have more background than we can answer, is I'm going to try and pull themes from what people are asking. So one thing that came up in the questions quite a lot, how do you make yourself stand out when you are applying online, especially to big organizations? And one person asked, and I thought this was important to answer as well, is should you actually send your resume to an HQ to stand out to recruiters?
Yeah, so I definitely advocate using the formal channels and wherever they say to apply. And again, it's making sure that you have a really strong resume that's very targeted to the organization with those right keywords, really speaks to their needs and where their experience that they need and their job description. So making sure you have a really good, tight resume. But then also looking for any backdoor channels. So a lot of times organizations can be a little bit different about their hiring process depending on the size of the organization. But if it's a larger organization, you know, there's a recruitment department that are kind of the gatekeepers. But there's also the hiring managers and other people within the organization. So you can use any in your networks and people you know. If you know someone in our organization, be like, hey, do you know who the hiring manager is for this position? Or being able to find out who the director of the department that you want to work in is. And then being able to get an email to them or your resume to them can be very effective. Sometimes it can take a while for a recruitment or an HR department to scan through all of the resumes, so being able to get through the back door can be a quicker way, and also helps get you noticed. Again, if somebody advocates for you, if you have 10 people to apply to a job and they all are very skilled and look good, if one of them gets a personal recommendation from somebody already within the organization, much more likely to interview that person or even potentially hire that person over someone else. So using any of those networks that you have. If you don't know anyone within the organization, that's why using Devex or even LinkedIn to try to find people that work there and starting to build a relationship with them that you can use.
Great. So another theme that people are asking about is, when are you qualified to apply for those mid-level positions? So, for example, what kind of years of experience do you need to be considered mid-level in international development?
Yeah, it can depend a little bit on employer and region, but typically mid-level is more like minimum 5, sometimes 7 years experience. So it usually tends to be more closer to 7 years experience. Development is, I think, a little different than some other industries where they're a little stricter on those terms, as far as you need to have a few more years experience than maybe some other industries to be considered mid-level. Some organizations that might need to be 10 years. For example, a lot of the IFIs, like the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, they consider anyone under 32 as a young professional, and they don't really consider anyone mid-level until they have at least 10, 12, sometimes 15 years experience. So it can depend a little bit on the employer. But for a lot of the implementing organizations, about 7 years experience in addition to a graduate level degree would put you in mid-level.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kate. Something that people are asking a lot about is, who should you ask for an informational interview? What kind of person at an organization should you sort of target to find out more about an organization and sort of get your foot in the door?
Yeah. It's definitely first good to go through the HR office. A lot of HR offices do this frequently, and they might even have whole systems set up for that. You could also try, again, the hiring manager if you have a personal connection to them. Oftentimes, these people can be very busy, so it can depend on their schedule. But a hiring manager, the way you can approach them is kind of feeding their ego a little bit. Maybe send an email, say that you were very impressed with their career and the work they've done and really admire and respect them and would love to kind of learn more about their career and their experience. So kind of fluff them up a little bit. It usually makes them feel pretty good, and people usually like to talk about themselves, or a lot of people like to talk about themselves, so focusing more on learning about them and their career can be a good way to get a meeting in with them and to learn more about the organization, and then to talk about your experience. So I would try both avenues. If one doesn't work, try the other. If you have a personal connection to someone that is like a hiring manager level, take advantage of that. If not, you can try going through the HR office.
Thank you so much for that. That's super helpful. So in terms of corporate social responsibility and sort of corporate firms, do they take people with development experience? And if so, how do you approach them to sort of, again, get your foot in the door?
Yeah, that's a good question. Historically, the way these organizations have staffed their departments, or these companies, I should call them, have staffed their departments, is by transferring employees from other departments. So, for example, an extractives company or one of the oil companies might have some engineers actually running their development programs that have no development experience. So it's more that they tend to just hire from within or move someone within, change their portfolio to take this on. But that's starting to change as these companies are getting more strategic about about their CSR work, and they're wanting to make sure they're spending the dollars, they want to make sure they're doing it wisely and effectively, and they want to make sure they're employing people who have the experience and the know-how to do so. So we're seeing more and more of these companies coming to Devex to look for expertise and looking to hire people that come from a development background. The important thing that they look for, though, is familiarity and comfortability working within a corporate culture. So they tend to shy away from people who have strictly only NGO experience because they're afraid that they won't be able to kind of fit into that corporate culture as easily and be able to understand that ultimately, they are a profit-driven company, and being able to align the development goals with the goals of the company is something that's very important to them. So if you're someone who has kind of a private sector background plus an NGO development background, then that's really what they look for. The positions oftentimes aren't advertised as much, again, because so many of it happens through transferring people, but they also do hire a lot of consultants, and we work with a lot of these organizations. They tend to be hired through networks. They sometimes contact us, or they use the Devex database to find them. So it's again, networking, getting to know these companies that are doing work. Pretty much every company tends to pick a different field that they want to work in. Exxon kind of owns malaria, for example. So if that's an issue you want to work on, getting familiar with what companies does what issues, and then trying to build networks within those companies if it's one that you're really interested in working with them.
Great, thank you again. This is a question that touches more on your advice to volunteer overseas if you're still looking to sort of break into a particular field or job. How long should you take volunteer positions? At what point should you stop? And does it ever become a negative to potential employers to have a lot of volunteer experience without a lot of paid experience in development?
Yeah, that's a good question. Once you, ideally you can get this experience while you're in school or doing something else that you're not having to go without a paycheck, because that's not fun. But once you have, I think, 1 or 2 really solid experiences under your belt, then you really should be looking for a paid job. So I wouldn't spend year after year. Of course, there's the Peace Corps and programs like that are long-term kind of volunteer positions, which are great programs and avenues for breaking in to development. But as far as if we are volunteering with an NGO, you might do for a few months, and then maybe you try a different NGO to kind of round that experience for a few months, and then you should really be looking for a paid position. I guess one of the dangers of volunteering for too long, if you have another job, is people will wonder, well, how come no one's hired you yet? Or, you're just, again, it can be hard for people to sustain that if they don't have an income.
Definitely. We've only got time for 1 or 2 more questions, so I've got a couple that I just think are important to address for everyone in the room. One person asked about knowledge skills versus soft skills. So what is sort of the value of transferable skills that are knowledge-based, sort of what you might learn at school or doing research, versus soft skills like communication and teamwork and sort of being able to prove that you work well within an organization?
Yeah, well, the knowledge-based skills are extremely important in getting the job. It's more the soft skills that are important once you have the job for doing well and getting promotion. But it's very hard from a resume. I mean, everyone can put that they're a great communicator and great team worker and all of those platitudes in a resume. So it's much harder for the recruiter or hiring manager to glean that. But those very kind of hard technical skills and ones that can take a lot of investment to teach people are very marketable. And being sure that you include that in your resume, those are the things that will really speak to a recruiter. Also, the thing to think about is the way the hiring process is within development, since so much of it happens on the proposal stage. For example, for USAID, and my experience is primarily with USAID hiring, but when you're submitting a proposal to USAID, you have to have your whole team of people that would be working on the project. Oftentimes, 25% of the points that they will use to score the proposals is based on the people and the personnel that they have. So it's very important for these organizations to have the best people they possibly can on their proposal. And often those points are determined based on whether or not these people have some of those hard skills. They don't really include some of those softer skills in the requirements. It's all focused on those hard skills. And so in order to make yourself marketable for being in a proposal, you really need to have those skills. And then, being in the proposal, if they win that, then you actually, you take the job. The way that process works, it tends to be that organizations more focus on those tangible skills versus the soft skills, because that's also what the donors focus on. But that's not to say that they aren't important, and they certainly are in succeeding in the job and to building a strong reputation and for getting promotion and advancement.
All right. So for the last question, one person asked about security clearance and whether it's valuable, especially for USAID, to include your security clearance status on your resume or your application.
Yeah, most USAID jobs do not require security clearance, but it's not going to hurt you by any means. So it's definitely good. I would put it on resume. It tends to be more important for the DoD contractors. But if you're looking to do a job in either Iraq or Afghanistan, you will need to have some kind of level of clearance, and so it'll speak to an employer that'll obviously be easy for you. And it's kind of a stamp of approval. I mean, if you've gone through a security clearance, it's a pretty arduous process, and so it's definitely not a bad thing to put on there. But for most positions, it won't necessarily be extremely marketable because it really won't be necessary to have it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for taking the time today to do this webinar. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So I'll do some concluding remarks, but I would really like to thank Kate for taking time out of her schedule to speak to all of us. It's one of the great sort of benefits of being an IPM with Devex. So we have come to the end of our scheduled time, but thank you all for attending and participating. We wouldn't be able to do these kinds of webinars without our individual professional members, and we want to make sure that you're getting everything you can out of your Devex experience.